everybody, it's me, Teresa McKelvey, the yarn shop around the corner, and today I'm here in the yarn shop with Ashley.
Hi.
And you should recognize Ashley. She is our yarn dyer. And so I was talking to Ashley a little bit about a new segment that I thought would be fun to introduce to the YouTube channel, and that's sort of a tip segment. And so I'd like to have different guests come on from our Fiber Friday friends and from just other customers who come in, and if they want to share their favorite knitting tips or things like that. So Ashley agreed to be my first guinea pig here. And so today she's going to talk to us all about how to properly store our yarn. Is that right?
That's right. And as with everything, your mileage may vary. These are just my tips and the things that I believe in storing yarn. First thing, probably the most important, you want to keep your yarn away from all pets, well-meaning friends and relatives, and from pests. So I am sure we have all had an animal who has taken our yarn out of our project bag and done damage or tangled up our skeins of yarn. I know my husband one day decided to help me by vacuuming and caught my lace knitting project in the vacuum cleaner beater bar.
Oh, no.
So those are big things. And of course, pests. We want to make sure that you don't store your yarn or finished objects on carpet. Carpet beetles will eat our yarn and yarn projects. You also don't want to store unwashed garments. There are animals that don't necessarily want to eat your yarn, but if they smell you on your yarn, they will munch on it and they will leave all of their little presents behind on your yarn and project. So make sure if you're going to store any garments for long term that you wash them prior to packing them up. Of course, you want to be careful of mice. Who wouldn't want to sleep in hand knits or hand crocheted items all day long? So you want to make sure that everything is in a place that they can't make their nests.
Right.
You know, there have been herbal remedies that have been used for centuries to keep any kind of fiber safe from pests, whether it be bugs or from animals. Cedar, lavender, I think cloves, and some other ones are all things that have been used. Fresh herbs are great if you're going to do that. You want to make sure that you use a solid version. Don't use a ground version of whatever spice you're using to prevent moths.
Now, when you're talking about, are you talking about like putting in like a little sachet, like a little bag, like some cedar chips or something, and storing it in there with it? Okay.
Absolutely. Be sure if you're going to use fresh herbs that you do put them in something. You can use a little organza or cotton bag or a little linen bag, just in case they give off any oils. You wouldn't want them to stain your skeins of yarn.
Yeah.
But you do want the smell to be there. And if you open up whatever container you have them in and the smell is not overwhelming, it's probably not doing a lot to prevent pests.
Oh, okay.
So if
you want it to be like, woo, it's noticeable.
You want it to be noticeable. If it's not, then it's probably not going to chase the moths off.
Okay.
So check it pretty often. I would say at least once a month, and make sure that you still are getting that strong smell. I know in the past people have used mothballs for this. I really don't suggest using mothballs. They off-gas a very strong odor that isn't necessarily the most pleasant odor.
Yes, it's very off-putting actually.
It is,
yes.
And it also could be really dangerous to pets and to small children. And also, it can actually break down the fibers in your yarn if it comes into immediate contact.
Oh, okay.
So you don't want to have a beautiful skein of yarn that gets ruined just because it came in contact with this chemical. So those are all things to think about. Just a few specific tips depending on what your yarn stash is made up of. First thing I want to talk about is protein fibers. So this is going to be any kind of like wool from a sheep or alpaca fur, anything like this. You can store those inside of a cotton bag for a little bit of extra protection because most of the insects that like to eat wool don't really particularly like to eat cotton. So giving them that gives them just a little bit of extra protection. So something like this, like a project bag, or even just a simple drawstring cotton bag or a cotton pillowcase are all good options for storing wool, actual animal wool protein fibers. If you have a plant-based fiber, something like cotton, you want to store it somewhere that's well ventilated because cotton will soak up every drop of moisture in the air. You want it to be in a lit area because this is going to prevent most types of bugs. but you also don't want it to be in direct sunlight. Plant-based fiber is really sensitive to sun, and so, of course, it can fade.
So you wouldn't want to put that, say, like up in your attic then?
No, you don't want to put it there because it would be too hot.
But not in your sunroom either.
But not in your sunroom because it could fade. Something behind glass, it could be a storage cube. A lot of people do like to have their cotton knits out for display because a lot of people use them for things like doilies. And a little bit of indirect light is fine. You just don't want it to be in direct sunlight all the time. And if you are going to have it in direct sunlight, you probably want to rotate it through your house. Just to keep it from getting faded. Finally, acrylic fibers. A lot of people want to say, oh, well, it's acrylic, it's fine. Bugs aren't going to eat it, and that's absolutely correct. But nesting pests will still get into your acrylic fiber. Mice will still get in there and chew on it. So you do want to think about where you're storing it. Also, mold and mildew can still grow in your acrylic. So don't want to store it in an airtight container. Also, you want to be careful with heat and acrylic. You can actually use heat to block acrylic just like you would use water to block wool. But that also means that you could actually melt your acrylic fibers if you store it somewhere too close to, say, like a water heater that's going to put off a lot of heat. You could damage your acrylic fibers over time. So something to think about. Just want to be careful about how you're storing your yarn.
Yeah, I was really excited one time when I was just learning to crochet, and I made pot holders. Of course, crocheted them out of acrylics, and luckily someone said, you don't want to put your hot pan on that. And I was like, what? So yeah, it's not good.
No, it can definitely damage it. It can melt just like any other plastic. So be careful. Think about where you're putting your acrylics too. They can also fade in sunlight. So just take care of your knits, protect them. We all want to be able to admire how beautiful the yarn is, but we don't want to have any damage to the fiber in time.
Right.
Now, the number one thing that all knitters are worried about, if you happen to see any moths in your stash or floating around your house.
Or in your yarn shop.
Or in your yarn shop. Isolate, treat, wash, and inspect. First thing you want to do is bag any yarn that's in a suspect area into Ziplocs. You can pop it into your freezer for a couple of months. That will help freeze anything in the process. After it's been in there for a little while, you can actually put the Ziplocs into a black plastic bag. In the sunlight, you can put it in a window, you can put it in the back of your car, just somewhere where it's going to get warm and have sun on that black plastic. That should kill any moth in any part of the life cycle that they have. After you do that, let it sit out for a week or so in the warm. You can take the yarn out, wash it, and inspect it. You want to make sure that there's no weak spots in the yarn, that you don't see any visible damage from them being chewed on. And as long as not, then it's okay to add that back to your stash. But be careful. As I said, your mileage may vary. Be aware of your stash, and you might still want to segregate that yarn for a little while just to make sure that you don't have any further issues.
That makes sense.
Next thing I want to talk about, because we do live in a very humid area. We're here in Alabama. It's hot. It's in the hundreds every day, pretty much in the summertime. Our humidity level, it could be extreme. We could be in the 80s or 90s, no problem. Yarn can mold and mildew, of course. The worst culprit for this is cotton yarn. Cotton yarn can actually hold up to 30% of its weight in water. So in 1 4-ounce skein, you could be talking about 3 tablespoons of water in this one little bit of yarn. So you really want to make sure that it's in a breathable container. Inside of a climate-controlled area. Again, you wouldn't want to put this in a hot attic. You wouldn't want to put this in a non-climate-controlled basement or in a storage shed.
Or even a shoe shed that you don't have AC or air in.
Absolutely. Something that's going to keep the humidity to a reasonable level. Let's face it, we're always going to have humidity. It's Alabama. But want it to be at a reasonable level. You want to make sure that the yarn can breathe. You wouldn't want to put this in an airtight container. So don't want to store it in a Ziploc. You don't want to put it in a airtight food container of some type. These are great when you're traveling to keep your yarn project in. I use it all the time when we camp. But for long-term storage, you want it to be able to breathe. So again, something like a cotton bag, a Rubbermaid container that is not airtight, just a plastic container is fine. The fabric storage cubes are a great option. Just something to make sure that they can get a little bit of airflow and you're not trapping moisture in with the yarn. Again, we talked earlier about sunlight. You want to make sure that you protect the yarn from sunlight just to prevent fading or bleaching.
And I have to do that here in the shop every so often because I have, all these windows. So every so often I have to move some yarn that's been close to the window for a while and, move it another place in the shop because of the sunlight.
Absolutely. And when we have our yarn, especially if it's hanged up like this, then you would get stripes from your sunlight.
Ooh,
So, very careful. With a ball of yarn, it's not quite so bad because then you would just get it on the very outer layer. But really think about how you're storing your yarn and the chance of fading. Another one that's kind of a controversial in the world of yarn is yarn cakes. Many of us love to knit from a yarn cake. That's me. I almost always cake my yarn up. Even if I buy a commercial yarn that is in a nice ball, I still usually cake it up. That's just my personal preference. When you cake up yarn, you possibly have put some pressure on the individual fibers just because it's tight here and loose here. Pressure can actually weaken yarn over time, especially if it is a protein fiber. Your wools and things, they can weaken over time. You don't want to put pressure on your yarn. So if the yarn did not come in a cake like this, you probably don't want to store it that way long term. The same way with a yarn ball. If it didn't come that way, I would be hesitant to store it long term. If your yarn came in a beautiful hank like this, that's probably the best way to store it. And the same thing goes for your finished objects. If you have knit or crocheted a garment and you hang it from a hanger, of course, over time it's going to stretch out.
Right.
You want to fold your garments nicely and put them in a basket or a drawer or on a shelf just so that they're supported, so that gravity does not stretch them out over time. And
now let me ask you a question there on that, because I know a lot of people come to the yarn shop and they want to ball up their yarn before they leave.
Right.
Excuse me, because they don't have a Swift at home. So what is the time frame? Like if they're going to use it within what certain amount of time should they go ahead and ball it up?
I generally try not to leave mine in the cake for longer than 3 months. I generally would say if I'm not going to use it within the month, I go ahead and put it back in a hank.
Okay.
So it just depends on the fiber and it depends on the person. Something like cotton or linen is probably going to be safer than a wool. And acrylic is probably going to be fine. The odds of it stretching are very slim. Cotton can stretch, but when it's in this form, it generally is not going to. So it's mainly going to be your wools that you're concerned about. And those, especially if it's something very thin, like a mohair or a very thin wool with no nylon, then I would definitely not want to leave it in a cake for very long. So.
And I know most yarn shops, I know I certainly would, if someone come back and said, hey, can I ball this up? And I would, from their hank, because they bought it as a hank, they knew they weren't going to use it for a while and then brought it back. I would say, of course, go right ahead, use it. So you can always ball it up when you're ready to start using it. So.
Absolutely. And, if you are stuck at home and, I want to start the project and I forgot to run it to the yarn store to hang up, you can always put one of these around a chair back and ball it by hand. Of course, it's much slower than having it done here at the yarn shop, and usually you have somebody do it at the yarn shop for you here. But it is possible to be done if that happens.
Yes.
It's not the end of the world. You can't just
Or I've seen people wrap it around their husbands. They put this around your neck. You can get other people involved in it. So
absolutely, children.
Yes,
that's always a good project for them to do.
That's right.
So as I said, just want to make sure that you don't have any pressure on your fibers long term. That would include squishing your fibers too much. If it's going to stretch them, that could be a problem too. So if you have a box like me that's really overpacked because you have a large yarn stash, you might want to be careful about how it's stretching them. Partial skeins. We've all done it. We've gotten this project and I only needed 50 yards out of this skein of yarn. So now I have almost a whole ball of yarn left. What am I going to do with it? Well, again, probably want to put it in a nice hank or in a loose ball if it's not, if it wasn't hanked originally. You want to make sure you label it. I can't tell you how many times I have gone back and said, now, what was this yarn? I know I knit this in a light colored yarn and this in a light colored yarn, but I'm not sure what this is. So you want to make sure you label it. I like to do what type of yarn it was, who it was made by, what the color was, the dye lot. If you save your tags, that's great. If not, I just get a piece of paper and write it and wrap around, make a note of what weight of yarn it was and what the content was, just in case you can use it at a later date. Because everybody wants to use all their yarn. They don't want to just have it laying around.
And it also helps the yarn shop. So if you do need to reorder more, for them to know exactly what color,
Absolutely.
exactly what, you know, you were working with. So
it really does. So keeping a good record, keeping it together. You also want to make sure it doesn't tangle up. You know, there's nothing worse than opening a box of yarn and finding exactly what you need, only to realize that half of it is tangled with the other balls of yarn that are in there.
yes.
I speak from experience. So you want to make sure that it's some way kept from tangling up. This could be, you could put it in a small drawstring bag, ball it really well, put a piece of paper around it, piece of tissue paper around it, just something to prevent it from tangling with the other pieces of yarn in your stash. Final thing, talking about organizing your yarn. You have lots of options, and it's completely up to the individual how they like to organize their yarn. Some people like to organize it by content. Oh, well, these are my protein yarns, these are my cotton yarns. Some people like to do by weight. This is my worsted weight, this is my sock weight yarn. It's all acceptable. You can do by color, whatever works for you and makes it the easiest for you to find what you want. The whole goal is to be able to knit the yarn that you have, or to know, hey, I need some more, this is what I need to go get. So
to enjoy our yarn stash even when we're not, you know, using it, just to be surrounded by it, organized.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you want to make sure it's just in some way that makes sense to you. Now, if you are somebody who doesn't shop for a stash, you shop for individual projects. I know some people will go ahead, they will say, okay, I've bought the yarn, I'm going to go ahead and print my pattern, here's my project bag, I'm going to put the yarn and the paper all in the bag, and it's ready. And when I get ready to start that project and I open it up and say, now, what did I buy this yarn for?
Right.
It's all together.
I need one of those people just for me. Oh, that would be great. I'm not one of those. It would be awesome, though.
So just makes it easy to identify later, and you're not buying yarn and saying, oh, no, I've forgotten what it was I wanted to knit. So
yeah,
these are all good tips, I think. Do you have any further tips to add, Teresa?
Oh, no. I am just the host. I'm bringing on the experts to give the tips. No, I just think this is such a common question that I get in the yarn shop about, you know, should I hank up my yarn, or should I ball up my yarn, and how should I store it, and how should I keep it? So I'm just so thrilled that we can be able to offer this video for people to watch and to learn a little bit. And I know that I've learned a lot today. So thank you, Ashley.
Well, I enjoyed sharing my tips, and I hope this is helpful to lots of people.
I'm sure it will be. All right, well, hope to see you in the shop soon. Bye.
Bye.